Anyway, so I'm going to talk about something a little different. So I've been in Los Angeles since August. Before that, I was in the city of San Francisco for 3 years. Before that, I was a consultant. I worked all around the country in cities large and small. And before that, I worked for the city of Oakland. So I've been sort of inside and outside government and given a lot of thought to why are some cities so much more successful at doing truly transformational projects and project delivery than others. And really, it's not rocket science. I think a lot of it comes down to the people. These are people inside your agencies making these decisions. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some strategies to kind of loosen up what you might perceive as a lack of innovation or a lack of willingness to change or just a little bit of foot dragging. So this is a street in downtown Los Angeles. This is Broadway, taken sometime in the 20s. I could have picked this same picture up from a lot of American cities around this same time. And when people look at images like this, we think about, there's a strong sense of nostalgia. We think about the street is heaving with people. You can see the cable cars there. You can see some horseless carriages starting to make an appearance. But the other thing going on here is that traffic deaths were at their all-time high during this period in the United States. The wealth gap was tremendous. We were on the brink of economic collapse. There were a lot of things underneath the nostalgia that weren't sort of as they seemed. So in the intervening years, we spent a lot of time thinking about how do we make our streets safe. And we made some well-intentioned choices that had really poor outcomes. So one of those choices was we need to provide absolute separation of people walking, people biking, and people driving. And the other idea was we need to totally separate where people live, work, and play. And that will somehow get us to an outcome that will achieve these safety goals and economic development goals that we're after. But that's not what happened. Instead, we ended up with cities, this is Broadway, this is that same street, taken about a year or so ago, cities that people wanted to leave and not necessarily cities where people wanted to stay. The safety outcomes we achieved were quite poor and continue to challenge us. In the city of Los Angeles, homicides are at an all-time low. They're at their lowest level since the 40s. But people dying just trying to get around town is either holding or increasing. And that is a trend that has held constant in a lot of big American cities, that those numbers are either equal or they're about to flip. And safety in transportation is something that is a critical concern for us. So this is what Broadway looks like, or looked like about a year or so ago. This doesn't work for transit. The transit speeds here were about 7 miles an hour on average. This provides some of the most dense transit in the downtown. And there was economic development and life trying to come back to Broadway. So Grand Central Market, which has been there for decades and decades, came under new ownership. The Ace Hotel came in down at the other end, and you were starting to see sparks of life. You can see that over the years, this just has Economic Redevelopment Agency written all over it. People came in and tried different things. There's wayfinding signs, there's historic markers, there's decorative pavement, but that wasn't enough to really change the story or the outcomes on Broadway. So in August of this year, we cut the ribbon on this project. So this is a project that removed a lane of traffic in one direction. It prohibited left turns by people driving. It instituted the first pedestrian head start, so people walking get a head start before the people driving get released on a green. And we expanded significantly the space for people to sit and congregate, specifically in front of these places where economic development and life and energy was starting to reemerge. And this is in Los Angeles, right? I've got 6,500 miles of streets, 4,500 signals. I'm in the car capital of the United States. But this is what's happening in downtown. So, they're constantly full. This is the other end of the street. And even though we don't have dedicated space for people biking, we've brought the speed closer, the street closer to bike speed. So we have made it a more bike-friendly street. We have made it a more enjoyable place to build community. And we had our Ciclavia route come through here. It's tremendously successful. It's one of the biggest in the country, where we close the street to cars and open it to people. And people just want to spend time on Broadway now. It is the heart of our downtown, and it's really starting to beat again. So how do we do that? Especially in Los Angeles, especially in downtown Los Angeles, a place where where the people are really wed to their cars. So step one is not a street. So since maybe 1950 or 60, these have been the primary ways that engineers and planners have measured success and have thought about streets. It was about how fast, how many, and how safe. And those were okay measures, but they didn't get us to outcomes. And over the last 5 or 10 years, the growing demand for our streets is to treat them truly as public spaces that belong to the people. And think about all of the outcomes that we could achieve if we thought about and measured our streets and talked about our streets in a radically different way. So I want my 2,000 or so employees to think of themselves as being in the public health business, the injury prevention business, the economic development business, the community happiness business, and the environmental resiliency business, not in the traffic engineering business. And that is a huge, huge cultural shift. But it's really important. And the emphasis on metrics cannot be overstated. You measure what you treasure, you get what you measure gets done. However you want to think about it, whatever catchphrase you'd like, it's all true. When we went out and measured what was actually happening on Broadway, what we found is that people outnumbered cars, even in the former design. But the way the space was allocated was totally imbalanced. We also found that we had an unacceptable number of crashes. Over 5 years, almost 225 people involved in crashes on Broadway. That is a really high number for a 10-block long segment of street. So when you bring the facts to bear and you talk about outcomes and not just numbers and metrics, you can begin to be more successful in the conversation outside your city walls. But we hadn't had a lot of data about how these projects impact businesses until very recently. So there's been some really significant work done in New York. It's been repeated in San Francisco and Portland that shows that we looked at 8 different streets where we had done some streetscape intervention in San Francisco and found that for 7 out of 8 of them, those streets either held constant or outperformed their competitors, the neighborhood, and the city for the same period of time. There's some magic to road diets and streetscape interventions and plazas and curb extensions that we don't fully understand, but the evidence is mounting that these things can strongly correlate to increases in sales tax receipts. Step 2, policy matters. So in every single organization that I've ever worked or where I've ever been a consultant, there are at least one, if not more people somewhere in that organization who really want to change things. But they are up against tremendous inertia of the way things have always been done. So the policies that you put in place, whether it's about Vision Zero, which is about getting to 0 traffic deaths in a certain number of time, we had a 20% by 2020 in San Francisco, which is we wanted to get to 20% mode split for people biking. We had a transit first policy. These things are really important and powerful. In Los Angeles, when I got there, one of the first things we did is put together a strategic plan that said we want to get to 0 traffic deaths, and we want to double the number of people biking in our city. These things are really important because they are valuable to the people who are really trying to change the inertia inside. So think about the audience inside the organization as much as outside the organization. So changing the rules. These 3 manuals have really governed the design and appearance of our streets for the last 50 or 60 years. And because we have a very tight stranglehold on something called design immunity, which protects us in litigation, it is very easy to stick with these. Because if you stick with these, you have your design immunity game, set, match, no question. But the fact is that there is a new set of rule books and design manuals that you can use. And I would say that a lot of cities, these are the National Association of City Transportation Officials, Bikeway Design Guide, Street Design Guide, and that's the Institute of Transportation Engineers, context-sensitive approach to walkable urban thoroughfares. These things, it's not enough to endorse them. A lot of cities endorse these. These are great, thumbs up. Federal government, federal highways endorse these. I would suggest that they need to be adopted. They need to become part of the playbook on the same shelf as these books here. Because these books have to apply from the mountains of Maine to the deserts of Arizona, they really apply everywhere and nowhere. And they become very difficult to get around. So this is about the people, and as somebody who was a longtime skeptic of study tours and junkets, which is a bad word for study tours, and conferences, et cetera, I have found them to actually be profoundly meaningful for folks who may have not gotten out of their cubes for 10, 15, 20 years. And these are the folks at the top of the pyramid who are the gatekeepers for design decisions. So this is a picture of a group of planners, politicians, engineers from San Francisco, Portland, and Chicago that went on a tour sponsored by People for Bikes to Denmark. So this is a picture from Copenhagen. There were 3 aldermen from Chicago on that trip. One of them was a woman who said at the beginning of the trip, "Scott and Ben, I know you paid for me to come on this trip because you want your bike lane in my district, but you can forget it. Thank you for the trip, but no way, no how." After 5 days on a bike, not only did they get their bike lane when she went back to town, but the 3 aldermen partnered to bring a bike camp for disadvantaged youth, inspired by something that they saw on the trip. I brought my finance people. They came home and funded the Bay Area Bike Share pilot that we rolled out. These trips can have profound meaning, and not just because there's nothing like spending 5 days on a bike, but because there's so much peer-to-peer learning. That alderwoman from Chicago spent a long time talking with Roger Geller from the city of Portland, who really helped open her eyes as a sort of neutral third party to ways that she might overcome some of the things she was concerned about in her community. But you don't have to go to Europe. You can go to Phoenix. You can go to San Francisco. You can go to Seattle. I guarantee that no matter where you are, there's some place nearby that's been tinkering, experimenting, and doing new things. So when I got to Los Angeles, I sent my head of geometric design to San Francisco for the NACTO conference. San Francisco is 5 hours away from Los Angeles. It's not far. And so I thought, well, we'll see how this goes. Worth a shot. When he came back and I gathered them all together to say, tell me what you learned, he said, I finally got it. I was on a bike on Market Street, and I understand how vulnerable you feel, and I understand what a big difference it makes just to have a foot of paint between you and a moving car. I could have told him that until I was blue in the face and would have gotten nowhere from long experience. But making that minor investment, which is so hard to come by these days, training dollars and dollars to send people on trips, can really be something that simple can be very profound. There were engineers there from the city of Oakland, which is 12 minutes away on BART, who had not come to San Francisco and seen some of the things that the city was doing. And step 5 is think about the players and the seats that they're in. So there's been a big shift over the last 5 years or so. A lot of transportation departments in the U.S. are not run by engineers, but those are political positions. And right below them sit the folks who feel like, I was here before you, and I'll be here when you're gone. I'm the 8th general manager in the last 12 years for LADOT. And the amount of, the lack of faith in the ability of executive management to get things done is my most profound challenge. But I thought a lot about who's sitting in what seats, who is the gatekeeper on what decisions. There are people in every organization who have an outsized influence on the design of your streets compared to where they sit. I can think about classic examples like the city attorney, your ADA coordinator, your chief traffic engineer. Thinking carefully about what's in their work plan and how you can change the conversation. How do design decisions get made, and who is at the table when they get made? In LA, at LADOT, I have some great folks. They would come up with a new idea, a fragile new idea, and if they had the relationships with the engineers most likely to say no, they would carry around that little idea and try and protect it from the storm and see if they could get it past those gatekeepers. But if they didn't, it would never happen. So So one of the things I'm trying to put in place is a design incubator where all of those folks, my landscape architects, my urban designers, my planners, my engineers are at the table, and the one running the meeting is a perceived neutral, is not the city traffic engineer, so that all of those folks are on equal footing. The thing that has been the most surprising and exciting to me about coming to LADOT is that a lot of those folks there get it. They understand things have to change. They have no idea how to do that. They don't know what that looks like. They don't know what it feels like. They don't know how to build those things. So investing in capacity building, giving them those experiential sort of moments and changing the conversation are the things that the hard work sort of inside and underneath the bureaucracy that I think is going to be really critical to having success out on the street.